At first glance, it looked like nothing more than two baby elephants trembling together in the wet grass after a storm. But the closer the rescue team got, the more the truth stopped them cold. The bigger calf was not clinging out of fear. She was holding the smaller one up, because if she let go, that snare-crushed leg could split open all over again. And that was only the beginning. Because days later, they would discover that the thing keeping the smaller calf alive was not just medicine, but the one who refused to leave her side. The storm had passed before dawn, but the land still carried its temper. Broken reeds bent toward the flooded flats, and the air over the Okavango edge smelled of wet dust, crushed leaves, and something heavier Mason Reed could not yet name. From the ridge, the world looked washed clean, too clean for a morning like this, too still after so much violence. Mason had worked that stretch of Botswana long enough to read silence the way other men read. Tracks. Birds should have been arguing in the acacia. Baboons should have been restless in the distance. Instead, the bush held its breath. Even the old helicopter pilot circling back above the floodplain said nothing through the headset, as if the stillness itself had weight. Then Mason saw them beneath a fallen mopane tree. Two elephant calves pressed so tightly together they seemed shaped from the same grief. Their mother lay yards away on her side, motionless in the flattened grass, one tusk sunk into the mud. The smaller calf trembled. The larger one did not move at all. That was what froze him first and held him there. Most orphaned calves broke in obvious ways. They ran in blind panic, screamed until their lungs gave out, or stayed beside the body as though refusing the truth could change it. This one did none of that. The larger calf stood square and rigid, her head low, her ears barely twitching, watching the world with a steadiness that felt far too old for her size. When the rescue truck rolled closer, the hyenas slipped back into the brush, disappointed but patient. Eli Brooks killed the engine. Dr. Hannah Cole climbed down with her medical pack, and Ava Bennett followed with a field camera hanging against her chest. No one rushed in. The scene carried the kind of tension that punished careless movement and exposed every bad decision. Mason took 2 steps forward and stopped. The reason hit him all at once. The bigger calf was not clinging for comfort. She was bracing. Her shoulder was wedged beneath the smaller calf's chest, her body angled with deliberate strain, carrying just enough of the other calf's weight to keep one ruined foreleg from touching the ground, even for a second. There was wire buried in the little one's leg, old poacher's cable tightened by every struggle she had made. The flesh around it was dark, swollen, and raw. If she collapsed, the wound would tear wider. If the larger calf shifted too fast, the smaller one might go down for good. Hannah swore under her breath. Ava forgot to lift the camera and just stared. Mason had seen mothers shield calves from lions. He had seen sisters circle an injured juvenile to keep a bull away. But this was different. The bigger calf was young enough to panic and weak enough to fail. Yet she had turned herself into a living crutch. Mud streaked her side, where she had clearly been holding that position for hours without rest. A fly settled near the smaller calf's eye. The larger one lifted her trunk and brushed it away with astonishing care, then pressed her forehead against the other's neck as if saying, "Stay up. Stay with me. Not yet." That small gesture broke something in Eli. He turned his face and wiped his mouth with the back of his hand before anyone could call him on it. Hannah crouched slowly, studying the distance, the leg, the angle of both bodies. Sedate the injured calf too hard, and she could fold before they caught her. Pull the stronger calf away first, and panic might finish what the snare had started. Mason watched Harper's eyes fix on Hannah's hands. She was not just afraid. She was making choices in real time. Ava whispered that the larger calf kept shifting her weight every few seconds, not randomly, but to match the tremor running through the smaller one's body. She was compensating, anticipating collapse before it happened. Hannah looked up at Mason then, and for a second, none of them seemed to be looking at an animal anymore, but at devotion under impossible strain. That was the moment Mason named them in his own mind, before the forms, before the tags, before the long drive ahead. The bigger calf would be Harper, because she was holding the whole world together with a body too small for the job. The little one would be Lily, because everything about her said fragile, bent, and still somehow alive, in spite of pain. The wind shifted at last, and carried the smell of death straight through the clearing. Lily shuddered. Harper leaned harder into her without taking a single step. Mason reached for his radio, but his thumb stayed still on the button for one extra breath. He knew the rescue had already begun long before they arrived. Now they just had to find a way not to break it. Mason finally pressed the radio, and once he did, the quiet broke all at once. Voices came through in clipped bursts, coordinates, kit requests, distance to the nearest clearing. But down beneath the fallen mopane, Harper never looked at the men or the truck. Her whole attention stayed fixed on Lily, as though the rest of the world had no right to matter yet. Dr. Hannah Cole moved first, slow and low, speaking in the calm voice she used for frightened animals and frightened people alike. Ava unrolled blankets on the ground. Eli brought the folding stretcher closer and then stopped when Harper swung her head toward him. It was not a charge. It was a warning, sharp and immediate, from something young that had already learned not to trust rescue. The plan changed 3 times in less than 2 minutes. They could not sedate both calves at once. They could not drag Lily free without tearing the wound open. And they could not risk Harper bolting and taking Lily down with her. Hannah decided to sedate only the injured calf, lightly and fast, while Mason and Eli kept Harper close without forcing her back. When the dart hit Lily's shoulder, Harper stiffened so hard her whole body seemed to lock in place. Her trunk slid over Lily's face, then her neck, then the ruined leg, searching, checking, refusing what she could already feel changing. Lily sagged inch by inch. Harper leaned harder to hold her up, fighting the medicine with sheer instinct, as if determination could keep sleep away. The moment Lily's weight began to slip, Mason stepped in. Eli caught the smaller calf under the chest, Ava steadied the hindquarters, and Hannah cut the wire free with short, brutal motions. Harper let out a sound, then not loud, not wild, but deep enough to vibrate in Mason's ribs. It was the sound of something breaking without falling apart. For one terrible second, Lily folded toward the mud. Harper lunged to catch her, nearly knocking Ava backward, and Mason saw it plainly. The big calf had memorized every inch of Lily's weakness. She knew exactly how far the leg could bend, how quickly the body tilted, where to press and where not to. Nobody had taught her any of that. Pain had. They got Lily onto the stretcher and lifted. Harper followed so close that Eli had to angle the canvas away from her tuskless face. She did not scream. She did not run. She walked beside the stretcher with her trunk stretched over the edge, touching the blanket that covered Lily's shoulder, keeping contact the way some souls keep prayer when words are no longer enough. The road out was mostly mud and broken ruts. The rescue truck rocked hard enough to rattle metal trays in the back. Hannah sat with Lily, checking her breathing, adjusting the fluids, one hand always near the wound. Ava kept glancing from her notebook to Harper, who stood braced in the transport bay, swaying with every turn, but never once taking her trunk off Lily's body. Eli drove like a man trying to outrun bad luck without offending it. At one washout, the truck dropped so sharply that Lily slid half an inch on the padding. Before any of the humans moved, Harper shoved herself against the stretcher and held it steady with her chest. The impact thudded through the metal frame. She absorbed it like she had been waiting for it all along. Somewhere past the floodplain, rain began again, soft at first, then steady on the roof. Ava noticed Harper still had not touched the water bucket clipped beside her. Not once. She had not taken the fruit Hannah offered either. But every time Lily gave a weak twitch under sedation, Harper answered with a low pulse of sound, so faint it was felt more than heard in the floorboards. Hannah looked up from the IV line and met Ava's eyes. This was not normal orphan behavior. Most calves in shock either shut down completely or lashed out at everything near them. Harper was doing something stranger and harder to name. She was staying functional for someone else. She was putting all her fear into one job and refusing to leave that job unfinished. By the 4th hour, the sky had gone pale again. The road widened. Fences appeared in the distance. Then the first outbuildings of Red Sands Elephant Recovery Center. Eli exhaled like he had been holding the same breath since sunrise. But when the gates opened and the truck slowed, Harper finally showed the edge of what the drive had cost her. Her legs began to shake. Still, she did not step away. As the truck rolled into the yard, Luke Parker came out from the barn, took one look inside, and stopped cold. There were 2 calves in that bay, but only one seemed to understand what was happening. Harper stood over Lily, mud-caked, rain-dark, trembling with exhaustion, and kept her trunk on the smaller calf as if arrival meant nothing until Lily woke. By late afternoon, the storm smell had faded from Harper's skin, replaced by antiseptic, damp hay, and the sharp mineral scent of treated water. Red Sands was quieter than the road had been, but it was not gentle. Gates clanged, buckets scraped concrete. Somewhere deeper in the barn, another orphan calf cried out once, then fell silent, as though the place had taught even grief to keep its voice low. Luke Parker watched from the aisle, while Hannah and 2 handlers eased Lily into the treatment stall. The space was clean, dry, and built for healing, but Harper did not see safety in it. She saw walls. She saw hands. She saw the moment Lily disappeared behind a swinging half-door, and every muscle in her body pulled tight again, as if the long drive had only been an intermission in the real danger. Hannah wanted the exam done fast. Lily's leg needed flushing, antibiotics, a full scan, and probably surgery before the infection climbed any higher. Harper needed her own injuries checked too, especially the bruising across her shoulder and chest. But the second Luke tried to guide her toward the adjacent stall, she planted herself so hard the chain on the gate rattled. She would not leave that doorway. Mason stayed just long enough to watch the standoff take shape. He had seen wounded bulls refuse sedatives and mothers mock charge trucks, but Harper's resistance was quieter than anger and somehow more difficult to answer. She kept reaching her trunk through the crack in the half door, touching wood, air, empty space, trying to measure the exact place where Lily had stopped and the humans had taken over. Ava noticed it first. Every few seconds, Harper made a low, rolling vibration deep in her throat, more felt than heard, like a far-off engine idling under the floor. At first it seemed random, a stress response maybe. Then Lily, groggy from sedation, answered from the other side of the wall with a weaker pulse, barely audible through the boards. Harper stilled, listening, and only then took half a breath. That changed the room. Luke stepped back. Hannah paused with one gloved hand lifted over the tray of instruments. The calves were not simply calling out. They were checking for each other, sending something rhythmic and measured through wood and distance. Harper's next rumble came lower, longer. Lily answered again. It sounded less like panic than a code made of reassurance neither human being could translate. They settled Harper into the stall beside Lily's, though settled was too generous a word. She did not lie down. She did not touch the water bucket or the calf formula left for her. She stood with one eye fixed on the narrow seam between the boards and her trunk extended toward that line of absence. Her body was inside Red Sands, but every part of her attention stayed on the hidden calf beyond the wall. When Luke offered the bottle, Harper turned her head away. When Ava tried sliced melon, Harper ignored it. But when Lily stirred and knocked softly against her own gate, Harper gave that same low vibration and took one distracted swallow before freezing again. Hannah watched the pattern repeat twice more, and a crease formed between her brows. Hunger had not moved Harper. Lily's signal had. Night came early inside the barn. Heat lamps cast amber pools against the timber, and insects tapped the screened windows like rain trying to get back in. Luke took first watch. He had worked with enough broken animals to know the hour after dark could tell you more than a full daylight exam. Harper never rested. She shifted weight from one forefoot to the other, listened, rumbled, listened again. Near midnight, Lily whimpered in her sleep, a thin sound of pain slipping out before the drugs could hold it down. Harper reacted instantly. She pressed both tuskless cheeks against the wooden divider and sent a deep, steady pulse through the boards, again and again, until the small sounds from the other stall quieted. Luke stood in the aisle with his flashlight lowered, feeling the vibrations through the soles of his boots. By morning, Ava had pages of notes and one startling suspicion. She clipped a small recorder outside Harper's stall and another near Lily's bedding, then compared the waveforms on her tablet. Each time Lily's breathing sped up, Harper answered within seconds. Each time Harper called, Lily's pattern eased. Hannah looked over the graphs in silence. The barn was beginning to show them something medicine alone could not. The practical problem remained. Lily needed intensive treatment, and Harper could not live forever through a wall. Still, every attempt to draw her farther down the aisle failed unless Lily answered first from the other side. Once, when two handlers closed Lily's door too fully and muffled the sound between them, Harper slammed her shoulder into her own gate hard enough to make the latch jump. So Hannah made the smallest concession she could live with. She ordered the divider gap left open by 2 inches at the bottom and told Luke to move Harper's bottle stand beside it. Nobody called it comfort. Nobody called it treatment. But when the morning feed came, Harper lowered her trunk to the narrow opening, waited until Lily's breath warmed the crack beneath the boards, and only then began to drink. Rain came back after sunset, soft at first, then steady enough to blur the yard lights beyond the barn. Water slid down the tin roof in long silver lines, and every sound inside Red Sands seemed to tighten around it. Harper stood at the divider gap where she had taken her bottle that morning, waiting for Lily's breath, Lily's rustle, Lily's answer through the wood. By then, the smell from the injured leg had changed. It carried heat and sickness under the sharp wash of antiseptic, and Hannah no longer had the luxury of patience. Infection was moving faster than the team had hoped. She studied the swelling one more time, then told Luke to clear the aisle and Ava to prep the surgery room. Tonight, whether they liked it or not, Lily had to go in. Harper knew something was wrong before anyone touched the latch. Animals always did. The barn had shifted into that careful human urgency that tried to look calm and never really fooled anybody. Hannah's voice got quieter. Metal instruments clicked into trays. Eli came in from the vehicle shed to help hold the back doors. Even Mason, who should have been off site by then, stayed by the entrance and said nothing. When Luke stepped into Lily's stall, Harper hit her own gate so hard the hinges rang. Not a wild attack, not blind panic. It was protest with direction behind it. She went straight for the place where the handlers stood between her and the smaller calf. Her trunk reached through the slats, searching for Lily's face, while Lily, feverish and weak, answered with a broken little rumble that barely carried. The sedative worked quickly on Lily, too quickly for Harper. 1 minute, the smaller calf was leaning against the bedding, fighting pain with those stubborn half-steps she had learned since the rescue. The next, her knees folded. Harper let out a sound so deep it seemed to come up through the floor rather than from her chest. Luke had heard grief before. This sounded closer to disbelief. They wheeled Lily down the corridor under battery lamps while rain hammered the roof hard enough to swallow footfalls. Harper followed the movement with her whole body, pacing the length of her stall, turning, pacing again, her shoulders scraping wood each time she reached the end. Ava tried speaking to her from outside the rails, but Harper no longer looked at people. Her world had narrowed to one vanishing shape. Then the lights flickered. Once, twice. The generators kicked in a second later, but that second was enough. In the brief, dark, Harper rammed the gate with everything left in her. The latch bent. A bucket overturned and rolled across the aisle. Luke caught the chain before it snapped free, and for a moment he was staring into the eyes of a calf who had decided walls were no longer real. "Sedate her," one of the junior handlers said, already reaching for the cabinet. Hannah did not answer. She was halfway into the surgery room, gloved and masked, with Lily laid out under the lamps and the wound opened for flushing. Through the swinging door she could still hear Harper throwing herself against wood. Every strike landed like a clock, counting down something nobody wanted to name. Luke made the choice before permission could find him. He dragged a thick, stable blanket to the side of Harper's stall and wedged himself near the bars, not close enough to touch, only close enough to be there. He began talking in a low, even voice about nothing that mattered and everything that might. The rain, the feed, room, the moon hidden somewhere behind the clouds, the fact that Lily was still here. Harper did not calm, not really, but the rhythm changed. She stopped charging the gate and started circling, then returned again and again to the same corner nearest the surgery room. Each time she paused there, she gave that low rolling vibration through her chest, as though sending something into the dark she could not enter. Luke watched her and realized she was still trying to reach Lily the only way left. Inside, Hannah worked fast. Dead tissue had to come away. The wire damage ran deeper than the field exam had shown. Ava stood at her shoulder recording times, fluid levels, heart rate, while rain drummed over the generator hum. The surgery itself went clean. That was the bitter part. They did everything right. They closed the wound, stabilized the leg, moved Lily into recovery, and still something felt unfinished. When Lily came out of anesthesia, she did not thrash or call. She barely moved at all. Her breathing stayed too shallow. Her pulse fluttered, then dipped. Hannah adjusted medication, changed flow rates, checked temperature, checked oxygen, checked everything a trained mind knew to check. But the little calf lay in the warmed recovery stall as if the body had been repaired while the will to return had been left somewhere else. Past midnight, the rain finally softened. The barn fell into that haunted quiet that follows a crisis no one trusts is over. Harper stood by the far wall, no longer slamming it, no longer pacing. She had gone still in a new and frightening way, listening for a sound that did not come. Luke looked toward the recovery room, then back at Harper, and felt the whole place tipping toward a truth medicine had missed. Near 1 a.m, Red Sands felt less like a rescue center and more like a church after bad news. The generators hummed low. Rainwater dripped from the roof in slow, tired beats. In the recovery stall, Lily lay under heat lamps without lifting her head. Across the corridor, Harper stood motionless, listening to a silence that had grown too large to bear. Hannah checked the monitors again, then checked them a second time, as if repetition might expose a mistake she could fix. Lily's wound was clean. The surgery had gone the way it should have. Her oxygen was acceptable, her temperature managed, her fluids steady. And still the little calf drifted farther away with each passing minute, as though survival itself no longer interested her. Luke stayed in the aisle with one forearm resting against Harper's gate. He had stopped trying to soothe her with words. She was beyond comfort now. Every few seconds, her trunk lifted toward the recovery room, then lowered again when nothing answered. She did not rage. She did not strike the wall. What frightened him most was the way she had gone quiet, as if she were saving strength for something final. Ava sat on an overturned feed bin with 2 recorders. Her tablet, balanced on one knee, headphones pressed hard over her ears. She kept replaying the last 48 hours in short clips, comparing Harper's low calls with Lily's breathing patterns. At first, it looked like coincidence. Then, the shape of it sharpened. Every time Harper's rumble reached Lily, the smaller calf's body eased for a few seconds afterward. She carried the tablet straight into the treatment room. Hannah barely looked up until Ava pointed to the screen and said, "It's not random." The waveform rolled across the glass in blue peaks and valleys. Here was Lily's panic spike. Here was Harper's call. Here was the drop that followed. Hannah stared, then glanced toward the doorway. For the first time that night, uncertainty reached her face. Noah Briggs, the overnight supervisor, heard enough to object before anyone said the dangerous part out loud. Post-op recovery had rules for a reason. Harper could agitate the patient, damage the dressing, spread contamination, undo everything. Hannah knew all of that because she had written half the protocols herself. But Lily's monitors kept telling a harder truth. The rules were holding. The calf was not. Luke did not wait for a formal decision. He was not reckless by nature, but he had lived too long around injured animals to mistake procedure for wisdom. He unlatched the service gate at the side passage, the one that led to the recovery wall, and motioned for Ava to stand clear. When Harper realized a path had opened, she did not bolt. She moved with terrifying purpose. The corridor seemed smaller with her in it. Wet hay clung to her knees. Dried mud still marked the curve of her shoulder where she had braced Lily in the field. Luke led her only as far as the clear partition beside the recovery stall, then stepped away. Harper pressed her body to the barrier at once, searching for Lily through the glass, through scent, through whatever thread she had been following all day. For one suspended moment, nothing changed. Lily lay still. Harper lifted her trunk, touched the transparent wall, and released a deep, rolling vibration that settled into the floor, the frame, the metal tray beside the IV stand. Ava felt it in her ribs before she heard it. It was not loud. It was steady. The kind of sound meant not to alarm, but to call somebody back from very far away. Lily's ear twitched first. Then her trunk gave a weak, uncertain curl against the blanket. Hannah stepped to the monitor, eyes narrowed, not trusting what hope did to perception. The numbers shifted by degrees so small they almost looked imagined. Her breathing lengthened. Her pulse steadied. When Harper rumbled again, Lily turned her head the slightest bit toward the wall, as if she knew exactly who was waiting there. Noah said they were gambling with the whole room. Hannah did not argue, but she did not send Harper away either. Instead, she moved closer to Lily, checked the incision, checked the line, then lowered one gloved hand from the monitor. "Keep her there," she said at last, and the word sounded less like surrender than discovery. Something outside the textbooks had entered the case, and she knew better than to ignore it. Harper stayed at the partition for the next hour without shifting more than a few inches. Whenever Lily's breathing grew quick and shallow, Harper answered with that same low current of sound. Whenever Lily quieted, Harper quieted too. Luke brought water in a rubber pan and set it near her feet. Only when Lily finally slept without flinching did Harper drink, and even then, she never took her eyes off the stall. The barn softened around them. Rain thinned to a whisper. Somewhere, a chain stopped rattling. Ava leaned against the wall with tears in her eyes and did not bother hiding them. Hannah stood beside the monitors, not smiling, not celebrating, only watching with the humbled look of someone who had spent her life learning how to save bodies and had just been reminded that bodies were not the whole story. Before dawn, Lily made a small sound from deep in her chest, more sigh than cry. Harper answered at once, gentle now, almost tender, and the little calf settled again. It was not recovery, not yet. It was only a narrow bridge over a dark place. But for the first time since the surgery, Harper was no longer listening into emptiness. And on the other side of the wall, Lily was listening back. Morning came pale and thin over red sands, the kind of light that made every hard night look briefly survivable. Harper was still beside the clear partition when the first keepers crossed the yard with feed buckets and hoses. She had not slept much. She had not needed to. Lily's breathing had stayed even through the last dark hours, and that alone seemed enough to keep Harper standing. Luke found her there with dried mud still clinging to the folds of her legs and a new stillness in her body, less frantic now, more watchful. When he slid a bottle through the side rail, Harper took it without looking away from Lily. That startled him almost as much as the night before. She was not choosing food over fear. She was learning, inch by inch, that Lily could remain alive even when silence fell between them. Inside recovery, Hannah changed dressings while Ava studied the overnight recordings again. The patterns were too clean to dismiss. Harper's low vibrations had not cured infection or closed the wound, but they had anchored something deeper than medicine could measure. Hannah admitted as much without saying it plainly. She just kept glancing toward the partition, as if every hard certainty she trusted had shifted by a degree. Later that afternoon, Ava packed hair samples, dung swabs, and the clipped tissue from Lily's original intake exam into a cooler for the regional lab in Maun. Hannah asked for a full panel, not only disease screening, but kinship analysis too. Nobody said why at first, yet the question had already entered the room. 2 calves could cling from fear. This was something else. This looked older and stranger. Harper spent the day in a pattern that had become familiar to everyone around her. She drank when Lily stirred. She rested only when Lily slept. If a handler stepped between her line of sight and the recovery stall for too long, her ears stiffened and her whole frame tightened. She was not possessive in the crude sense. She was vigilant, as if the world had already taken too much and would seize another chance. 3 days later, Lily stood for the first time after surgery. The moment was small and ungainly, nothing like triumph in a movie. Her leg shook. Her trunk dragged for balance. Hannah and Luke were ready to catch her if she fell. But what Lily searched for was not a human hand. She turned straight toward the partition, and Harper moved with her, matching every wobbling inch from the other side. That evening, while the calves dozed in neighboring stalls, Ava returned from the office carrying a folded printout and a face Hannah recognized before a word was spoken. Mason had driven back in with supply crates and happened to be there when Ava laid the report on the feed table. Luke leaned over her shoulder. Noah came in from the yard and frowned at the silence. Something in the file had stunned them all. "They're not sisters," Ava said at last, and even spoken quietly, the sentence changed the air. Not full siblings, not half-siblings, not close maternal relation at all. The markers were clear. Harper and Lily had not been born to the same mother, and likely not even to the same immediate family line. For a second, nobody spoke, because all their hearts had arranged the story differently. Mason was the first to picture the field again. The dead mother in the grass, the wire in Lily's leg, Harper bracing her with a body too small for the burden. He had assumed blood explained devotion, because blood made things easier to understand. But now that explanation was gone, and what remained was harder, and in a strange way, more beautiful. Harper had chosen Lily when everything around them was falling apart. Hannah sat down slowly on an overturned bucket, the paper still in her hand. In all her years with orphaned calves, she had seen companionship, dependence, imitation, even panic attachments. She had not seen this. Not a bond formed by habit, not one enforced by herd structure. This was a decision made in catastrophe, held through pain, transport, surgery, and fear, and it had survived every attempt to name it something simpler. Luke said maybe they had been trapped together near the same herd when the poachers came. Ava thought one calf could have been wandering and found the other after the storm. Mason wondered if Harper had heard Lily crying and simply refused to leave. No theory felt large enough. Across the barn, Harper lifted her trunk through the lower gap in the divider, and Lily reached back at once, touching skin to skin for one brief second. That touch undid something in Hannah. All week she had been treating the calves as a problem to solve. One body repaired, one nervous system regulated, one dangerous attachment managed. Now she saw the shape of the truth more clearly. Harper had not become strong because she was less frightened. She had become strong because somewhere in the worst moment of her young life, she decided Lily would not face it alone. The next morning, Hannah changed the plan. No one would talk about separation yet. No one would force distance for the sake of neat outcomes. If Harper was the bridge Lily used to walk back into the world, then the job was not to burn that bridge. It was to widen it carefully, until one day another calf, then another, and maybe even a herd, could cross it too. As the sun went down, the barn glowed gold through the dust and insect screens. Harper lay for the first time since arriving at Red Sands, not deeply asleep, only resting on one side with her trunk stretched toward the partition. Lily settled on the other side, close enough that their breaths rose and fell in soft answer. They were not sisters. Somehow, that made what Harper had done feel even larger and far from over. Red Sands changed its strategy after the lab report, though nothing about the work became easier. Hannah stopped treating Harper and Lily as a bond to be reduced, and started treating them as a foundation to build from. The goal was no longer separation. It was expansion. If Harper trusted only one soul in the world, then someone else would have to be invited into that circle without breaking it. The first to try was Benny, a young bull with oversized ears and the kind of foolish courage only healthy calves possessed. He approached Harper the way weather approached dry grass, all noise and energy and no sense of consequences. Harper turned broadside at once, placing her body between him and Lily. But Benny only kicked dust, flapped his ears, and offered a crooked branch like a child bringing a gift he barely understood. Harper refused the branch. Lily hid behind her shoulder. Benny stayed anyway. He splashed in the mud trough by himself, stumbled over his own feet, then came back the next morning as if rejection had never happened. Luke laughed the first time Harper failed to drive him off completely. "He's too dumb to be offended," he said. Ava thought that might be exactly what the calves needed. June came next, quieter and older, a steady young female with the deep patience that some elephants seemed born carrying. She did not rush them. She stood a little way off during feedings, then closer during afternoon browse, then one evening simply lay down in the yard within sight of both calves and closed her eyes. Harper watched for nearly an hour before deciding the silence meant no harm. What changed Lily first was not courage, but imitation. She saw June drink from a shallow trough and copied her. She watched Benny push open a swinging gate with his forehead and tried it with her good shoulder. Harper noticed everything. She still stayed close, still tracked Lily's limping steps as if disaster might return from any angle. But her attention was beginning to split. That was new. That was hope. By the time the dry season edged closer, Lily could bear weight for short stretches without trembling. The scar on her foreleg remained angry and tight, but the leg held. Harper had filled out too, the hard lines of strain easing under regular food and sleep. Some mornings, she even forgot herself enough to join Benny in stripping bark from low branches, only to glance back a second later and make sure Lily was still there, That was when Cedar Basin entered the conversation. The release grounds lay farther east, where floodplains softened into open scrub and a semi-wild herd moved in and out with the seasons. It was the place for calves who had healed enough to begin learning the old language of distance, rank, warning, water, and return. Hannah knew what it meant. Success, if they earned it. Risk, even if they did not. The trip to Cedar Basin felt different from the rescue road. Lily walked into the transport crate under her own power this time, slow but stubborn. Harper followed after one long look back at Luke, at Ava, at the barn that had held her worst nights and her first small mercies. She did not panic when the doors shut. She only pressed her trunk against the slats until Lily answered from the crate beside hers. Cedar Basin was wider than Red Sands in every way that mattered. The wind moved freer there. The fences sat farther back. The holding paddocks opened onto grassland marked with old tracks and recent droppings from elephants that belonged to nobody and nothing but the land itself. Harper stood at the edge of the new enclosure, with Lily at her side, and stared toward the horizon, as if measuring how much trust it might cost. Benjamin Shaw, who ran the release grounds, watched them for 2 days before offering an opinion. Harper, he said, was not antisocial. She was guarding a promise. There was a difference, and if the staff forgot it, the calves would pay for that mistake. So they kept Benny nearby for play, June nearby for Cam, and the wider herd visible, but not forced, a world close enough to study and not yet close enough to fear. Then Rose appeared. She came with the evening herd like a shadow becoming solid, a heavy old matriarch with one torn ear, and the kind of presence that made even Benny stop fidgeting. Harper saw her at once and froze. Lily pressed close. Rose did not challenge them. She only stood beyond the fence line, lifted her trunk into the wind, and held there, gathering their scent as though reading a long letter. For 3 evenings in a row, Rose returned with the same restraint. Younger elephants drifted behind her, curious, talkative, loose in the body the way secure animals often are. Harper kept Lily tucked near the gate, never fleeing, never advancing. On the 4th evening, June crossed the yard and stood halfway between the sisters and the fence, not blocking either side, simply showing with her own body that proximity did not always mean danger. That small geometry changed something. Lily took one step forward, then another. Harper moved with her automatically, shoulder close, trunk grazing Lily's back. Rose answered with a low, measured rumble, so deep it barely sounded like sound at all. The calves stopped, listening. Benny lifted his head. Even the birds in the grass seemed to pause. It was not welcome yet. It was acknowledgement, and sometimes that was the harder gift. Night settled slowly over Cedar Basin, warm and coppery, with insects rising from the reeds and the distant herd fading into the dark. Harper lay beside Lily under the open shelter, but she did not sleep at once. Her eyes stayed on the place where Rose had stood. Somewhere beyond the fence, a low rumble drifted back through the grass. Lily answered softly. After a long pause, Harper answered too. The water rose after midnight, not with thunder or panic, but with the patient certainty of something ancient reclaiming low ground. Cedar Basin had seen floods before, but this one came crooked, fed by distant rain none of them had smelled. Under the shelter, Harper woke before the keepers did. She lifted her head, listened to the shift in the dark, and stood. Lily was slower getting up, Her bad foreleg had grown strong enough for distance, but mud still made promises the body could not always keep. Harper moved to her at once, shoulder brushing shoulder, guiding her toward firmer earth at the edge of the paddock. The night was heavy and black, broken only by lantern light in the far barn and the silver skin of spreading water. Benjamin was halfway across the yard when the bank gave way. It happened with a wet crack and a sliding sigh, the kind of sound land makes when it decides it has been holding on too long. Lily's front feet went out from under her. She dropped hard into the slick margin, and the old injured leg folded at the wrong angle before disappearing into the churned black mud. Harper did not hesitate. She went after her, the way she had gone after everything that ever threatened Lily, with no pause for danger and no thought for herself. By the time Benjamin reached the slope, Harper was already braced below her, chest pressed into Lily's shoulder, taking the collapsing weight the only way she knew how. The image hit him like a memory made flesh. It was the mopane tree all over again. The same impossible angle, the same refusal to let the smaller calf fall. Mud climbed Harper's legs and sucked at her feet, yet she kept forcing her body upward under Lily's chest, straining to hold the injured foreleg clear of the deepest pull. Lily trembled violently. Harper answered by leaning harder, as if her own bones could become solid ground. Benjamin shouted for ropes, for boards, for the utility lights. Luke, who had come from Red Sands for the transition week, was already running. June paced the upper bank, distressed and uncertain, while Benny trumpeted uselessly into the dark. The humans got close enough to see the danger clearly, and that was the problem. One wrong move, one shouted command, and both calves could slide deeper. Harper's strength began to fail by inches rather than all at once. Her hind feet slipped. Her muscles shook so badly the ripples ran through Lily's body too. Still she held. Still she kept that ruined leg from bearing the worst of the weight. Then she lifted her head to the flood-dark grass beyond the paddock and released a call so low and long it seemed less like sound than a line cast into the night. Everything stopped after that. Even Benny quieted. The water whispered through reeds. The lanterns hissed. Somewhere beyond the outer fence came an answer, deep and measured and unmistakable. Rose. A second rumble followed, then a third, then the heavy, the percussion of bodies moving at speed through wet ground. Benjamin turned toward the dark, just as shapes began to gather out of it. The herd did not arrive in chaos. They came with purpose. Rose first, broad and steady, her torn ear black against the lantern glow. Two older females flanked behind her. Then June surged down from the bank to join them, and Benny finally found the courage to do something useful and moved where the adults pushed him. The fence line stood between wild judgment and human order for only a second. Benjamin opened the side gate before anyone could argue. Rose crossed through as if she had every right. She went straight to Harper, not Lily, and placed her trunk against the bigger calf's neck in one brief touch that felt almost ceremonial. Then the herd began to work. One female anchored high ground. Another pressed against Lily's hindquarters. June blocked the sliding edge. Harper never let go. "Easy," Luke whispered, though none of it was for him. Rose rumbled once, deep enough to shake the pooled water. On that cue, the whole formation shifted. Lily lurched upward, slipped, then rose again as weight transferred through bodies instead of panic. Harper shoved from below with everything left in her. Mud tore loose in sheets. Benny stumbled backward, and suddenly, Lily was on the bank. Harper tried to follow and nearly collapsed in the effort. Rose turned back at once. June pressed from one side, while Benjamin and Luke caught the other just enough to steady without intruding. For the first time in the whole long night, Harper accepted help. She climbed out, shaking, drenched, and exhausted, then swung immediately toward Lily, checking the leg, the face, the breath, the simple fact of still here. Dawn came slowly after that, pale gold over waterlogged grass. Mason arrived in the survey chopper just as the first light spread across Cedar Basin, and from above, he saw a sight he would carry for the rest of his life. Harper and Lily standing, together near the broken bank, not alone anymore, but ringed by Rose, June, Benny, and the others, like a wall built out of choice instead of blood. Harper no longer had to hold Lily up by herself. That was the change written quietly into the morning. She still stood close, still reached now and then to touch Lily's shoulder, as if confirming a miracle she did not quite trust. But when the herd turned toward higher ground, both calves moved with it. And this time, when Harper followed, she did not sound like grief. She sounded like she belonged. If this story stayed with you, please leave a simple comment below. Type 1 if you believe love and loyalty can carry us through the darkest moments. Type 0 if this story broke your heart. And if you want more powerful stories like this, please subscribe and join us for the next one.